High in the mist-shrouded peaks of the Andes, where the air grows thin and ancient stones whisper secrets to the wind, lies one of history's most captivating puzzles, the sacred ceques of the Inca Empire. Picture this, a vast network of invisible lines crisscrossing the mountains like threads of some celestial spiderweb, connecting temples, shrines, and natural wonders in a pattern so precise it defies coincidence. These weren't mere footpaths or trade routes, they were a living map of the cosmos itself, etched into the earth by a civilization that saw the divine in every mountain and stream. And here's the astonishing part: even today, after centuries of study, we've only begun to unravel the 30 profound mysteries hidden within these alignment lines. What messages did the Inca encode in this sacred geometry? Why did they anchor their world to these invisible pathways? And what lost knowledge might still be waiting untouched beneath our feet? The ceques were far more than physical trails. They were the arteries of an empire's spirituality, pulsing with ritual and meaning. Imagine walking these paths as an Inca priest might have, where every turn, every stone, every spring was charged with purpose. A single ceque could link a humble village shrine to a towering mountain god, binding the everyday to the eternal. Modern archaeologists have spent decades piecing together their secrets, yet each discovery only deepens the enigma. Some lines align with solstice sunrises, others trace the paths of sacred constellations, and a few point ominously to places where no ruins or artifacts have ever been found. What were the Inca trying to show us? Were these markers of forgotten rituals, guides for the afterlife, or perhaps something even more extraordinary, a code left behind for future generations to decipher? This is a journey into the heart of a mystery that has outlasted empires. From the shadowy corridors of long-sealed caves to the sun-baked ruins where offerings still lie undisturbed, we're about to explore 30 of the most baffling, awe-inspiring secrets hidden along these ancient lines. You'll witness the precision with which the Inca mapped their universe, hear the theories that send shivers down scholars' spines, and stand at the threshold of discoveries that could rewrite history. So take a deep breath of that Andean air, thin with altitude, thick with legend, and prepare to walk the ceques as few ever have. The stones are ready to speak. Are you ready to listen? At the heart of the Inca Empire, where the city of Cusco once thrived as the navel of the world, something strange lurks in the historical record, entire ceque lines that simply vanished. Spanish chroniclers meticulously documented these sacred pathways, describing their routes, shrines, and rituals in astonishing detail. Yet when modern researchers retraced their steps, they found gaps in the web, entire stretches of ceques that should exist but don't. One of the most baffling disappearances centers around the Antisuyu quadrant, where 8 ceques described as vital to rain ceremonies have left no physical trace. No stones, no markers, not even disturbed earth. It's as if the land itself swallowed them whole. Theories swirl like Andean mist. Some scholars argue Spanish priests, determined to dismantle Inca spirituality, systematically destroyed these pathways, erasing them from memory. Others point to the sheer precision of the missing segments, how they avoid major colonial construction sites, almost as if they were hidden rather than demolished. Then there's the chilling possibility that the Inca themselves obscured these routes, perhaps to protect knowledge too sacred for outsiders' eyes. After all, the missing Antisuyu ceques were tied to rituals summoning rain from mountain spirits, a power the empire's elite may have guarded fiercely. Even stranger are the accounts of colonial witnesses who described ceques that moved, lines shifting position during lunar eclipses or vanishing entirely when certain stars aligned. Were these optical illusions, or did the Inca embed layers of meaning into their sacred geography, designing some ceques to be invisible to all but initiated priests? Today, archaeologists scour satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar data, hoping to catch a glimpse of what's been lost, but the Andes keep their secrets close. Perhaps some truths weren't meant to be walked, only remembered. Standing atop the ruins of an ancient Inca observatory, you'd expect the ceques stretching outward to point precisely to solstices, equinoxes, or the rising of sacred stars. But here's the twist: some of these alignments are off, not by much, just enough to unsettle scholars. One ceque near Sacsayhuamon, for instance, lines up perfectly with the June sunrise, but only if you account for a calendar shift of roughly 11 days. Another, tracing the path of the Pleiades, seems to memorialize a star position from centuries before the Inca Empire even existed. How could a culture famed for celestial precision get their own sky maps wrong? The simplest explanation might be time itself. Earth's axial wobble, known as precession, gradually shifts the stars' positions over centuries. If the Inca inherited these alignments from older Andean cultures, likely the Wari or Tiwanaku, their celestial markers would have drifted out of sync by the 15th century. But that doesn't explain why some incorrect alignments were actively maintained, even celebrated. At Cuenco, a zigzagging ceque points to a mountain where the sun rises on a date with no known agricultural or ritual significance. Unless, of course, it marks something far older, a memory etched in stone like a fossilized star map. Then there's the deliberate misfire theory. Spanish accounts mention certain ceques being veiled, their true alignments hidden behind decoy markers to shield sacred knowledge. Imagine a priest chanting at a shrine that seems misaligned, while the true ceremonial act occurred secretly where the stars actually lined up. This might explain why some ceque rituals were timed to wrong dates in colonial records. The Spaniards documented what they saw, not what was whispered under moonlight. The most haunting possibility: these anomalies aren't mistakes at all, but waypoints for events yet to come. The Inca believed time was cyclical, history repeating in great loops. Could their misaligned ceques be set for future celestial events, a message across centuries, waiting for the skies to realign? Modern simulations show one puzzling ceque near Ollantaytambo will perfectly frame the star Alpha Centauri in the year 2643. Coincidence or cosmic clockwork? Every outlier in this celestial web forces us to ask, were the Inca tracking time or leaving breadcrumbs through it? Evidence mounts that these errors were anything but. Soil analysis along discrepant ceques reveals concentrated offerings of black obsidian, a stone linked to oracles and visions. Perhaps these paths weren't meant to mirror the sky as it was, but as it could be. After all, the Inca didn't just observe the cosmos, they conversed with it. Maybe some ceques were celestial doorways, their alignment less about precision than possibility, a bridge between worlds, visible only when the stars agreed to meet them halfway. Spanish records tell chilling tales of blood-soaked shrines along certain ceques, places where the Inca supposedly offered human lives to the gods. Yet when archaeologists excavate these sites, they uncover something startling: not a single bone. No fragments of skulls, no telltale cuts on sacrificial blades, nothing to match the colonial horror stories. Take the shrine at Apachita, described in gruesome detail by one friar as a place where children were given to the mountain. Modern digs reveal only bundles of coca leaves, tiny woven figures, and the occasional llama fetus. Powerful offerings, yes, but a far cry from the carnage in Spanish accounts. This discrepancy sparks fierce debate. Some scholars argue the conquistadors exaggerated or outright invented human sacrifice narratives to justify dismantling Inca religion. Others propose something more nuanced, that these were sites of symbolic sacrifice where rituals mimicked death without spilling blood. At Coila Riti, for instance, priests dressed in star-patterned robes would execute effigies stuffed with precious stones, enacting celestial battles where no actual lives ended. Could the Spanish have witnessed these performative rites and mistaken them for the real thing? Then there's the case of misidentified shrines. The term huaca, applied broadly to sacred spots, a spring, an oddly shaped rock, even a crossroads. Early Spanish observers unfamiliar with Andean spirituality may have assumed any huaca along a ceque was a sacrificial altar. At Vilcabamba, a shrine once labeled a slaughter stone turned out to be an astronomical marker. Its blood channels were grooves to track shadow movements during solstices. The most compelling theory emerges from Inca cosmology itself. Their world thrived on reciprocity, not just taking life but exchanging it. Along certain ceques, excavations reveal pits filled with burnt offerings, seashells from distant coasts, tropical feathers, even flakes of gold beaten impossibly thin. These weren't substitutes for human sacrifice, they were something grander. The Inca may have believed the essence of precious things could nourish the gods as vitally as blood. A sprinkled handful of powdered turquoise might represent the sea's breath, a buried quipu knot, the silent voice of ancestors, perhaps the greatest irony. The bloodless shrines often show more sophisticated spiritual engineering than sites linked to actual sacrifices. At one controversial huaca near Choqquequirao, carbon dating reveals offerings were placed precisely where underground quartz veins intersect spots emitting measurable electromagnetic anomalies. Were the Inca harnessing earth energies we're only now learning to detect? It's a reminder that in this empire, even emptiness speaks volumes. What Spaniards interpreted as absence may have been the quiet hum of a different kind of sacred calculus. Beneath the surface of what we can see along the ceques lies another layer of mystery, one carved not into stone but into water. Recent LiDAR surveys have uncovered something astonishing. Entire stretches of these sacred pathways align perfectly with hidden aqueducts, tunnels, and underground channels so precisely engineered they defy the technology of their time. These aren't just irrigation ditches or simple water conduits. Some run for miles without a single deviation, passing beneath mountains and resurfacing at shrines where no visible water source exists. One particular channel near Tapon follows the exact curve of a ceque for over 3,000 feet. Its walls polished smooth as glass, yet it empties into a dry basin with no apparent use. Why would the Inca go to such lengths to hide water in plain sight? The answer might lie in their belief that water was more than a resource, it was alive. To the Inca, springs were tears of the earth, rivers the veins of gods. Subterranean channels like these may have been ceremonial pathways for Yunu, the sacred essence of water, allowing it to flow invisibly between huacas like a whispered prayer. At Moray, where concentric terraces form a giant agricultural laboratory, LiDAR revealed a ceque-fed aquifer that still regulates microclimates today. But the real shock came when researchers traced its path. The water doesn't just irrigate, it mirrors the Milky Way's dark constellations, with channels branching at angles matching celestial patterns described in quipu records. Were these hydraulic systems also star maps in liquid form? Even more puzzling are the silent channels, sections where water should flow but doesn't. Near Pisac, archaeologists found a flawless stone conduit descending toward a temple, yet the surrounding water table sits far below its entrance until someone noticed the carvings. Tiny notches along the channel sealing a line with specific solar positions. When sunlight strikes at noon during the December solstice, the beam travels the dry channel's entire length, illuminating a hidden symbol at its end. This wasn't a failed aqueduct, it was a light-based calendar, a solar ceque hiding in water's absence. Then there's the enigma of reversal. At Chinchero, one channel defies gravity for over 200 feet, its water seeming to climb upward. The secret, a precisely calculated series of underground chambers creating a siphon effect technology the Inca shouldn't have known. Spanish chronicles mention priests using these channels to produce miracles, making water appear or vanish on command during ceremonies. Were these hydraulic feats meant to demonstrate control over the divine, or were they teaching tools showing initiates how to read the earth's hidden messages? The most tantalizing clue comes from a submerged ceque near Ollantaytambo, where divers recently discovered a chamber lined with gold flakes. The walls depict constellations upside down as if reflecting on water's surface. Here, the Inca may have staged rituals where the sky below mirrored the sky above, merging celestial and terrestrial realms. It's a haunting reminder, in this empire, even the unseen had purpose. Every hidden channel, every dry aqueduct whispers the same question. If water was their ink, what stories were the Inca writing beneath our feet? Among the most baffling discoveries in Inca archaeology are the so-called mirror ceques, lines around Cusco that don't just point to the stars but appear to flip them upside down. These reverse alignments form perfect geometric reflections of celestial patterns, as if someone pressed the night sky against the earth and traced its inverted twin. One cluster near Coricancha mirrors the Southern Cross constellation with eerie precision, except the stone markers are placed where the stars wouldn't be, spacing themselves as the constellation's negative image. Why would a culture renowned for astronomical accuracy encode the heavens backward? The answer may lie in a radical Inca concept of space. Unlike Western traditions that map the sky from a single viewpoint, Andean cosmology often embraced dual perspectives, what scholars call complementary opposition. When an Inca priest observed the Milky Way arching overhead, they also visualized its reflection in sacred lakes or polished metal discs. Some Quipu records suggest they believed celestial beings inhabited this mirrored realm, requiring rituals performed in reverse. At Cuespehuanca, a shrine built along a mirror ceque, offerings were placed face down and priests processed counterclockwise, deliberately inverting customary practices. Then there's the mathematics. Modern surveys reveal these reverse ceques aren't random. Their angles follow strict logarithmic progressions. One line near Sacsayhuamon divides its length into segments matching the Fibonacci sequence but counted backward. Another mirrors the Pleiades star positions using prime numbers in descending order. This wasn't sloppy astronomy. It was advanced spatial reasoning, a way to encode celestial knowledge in terrestrial form. The Inca may have used these inverted lines as teaching tools, forcing initiates to think in 3 dimensions by mentally flipping shrines and stars like pieces in a cosmic puzzle. The most provocative theory comes from a weathered quipu found near a mirror ceque at Rakchai. Its knots, when analyzed as positional values, plot a 3-dimensional map of the Orion constellation, if viewed from beneath the celestial plane. Spanish chronicles mention Inca elders speaking of the sky below, a realm where gods walked with their feet toward ours, were mirror ceques meant to bridge these inverted worlds. Recent experiments show that during June solstice sunrise, sunlight bouncing off polished stelae along certain reverse alignments projects shimmering constellation patterns upside down onto temple walls. Perhaps the greatest clue lies in the Inca language itself. Quechua verbs often lack tense distinctions between past and future, focusing instead on spatial relationships, up versus down, visible versus hidden. In this worldview, mirror ceques might not be reversals at all, but the other half of a conversation. A star doesn't simply exist above, it speaks downward through its earthly reflection. At dusk in the Andes, when the first stars appear and their duplicates glimmer in mountain springs, the ceques remind us, sometimes truth isn't found by looking up, but by learning to see through the world's silvered surface. Walking certain stretches of the ceques, modern researchers have stumbled upon something that defies expectations: rocks that sing, not metaphorically but literally. Strike one of these stones with a small hammer, and instead of a dull thud, it rings out with a clear, resonant tone, as if carved by some ancient tuning fork. The most famous examples cluster near Hualabamba, where an entire hillside of volcanic andesite blocks chimes with distinct musical pitches when tapped. Scientists call these lithophones, but the Inca seem to know them as rumi takie, stones that sing. The mystery isn't just how they work, but why they were placed so deliberately along sacred pathways. Geologists have traced the phenomenon to the stone's unique crystalline structure. Over millennia, seismic activity and mineral deposition created internal fractures that vibrate at specific frequencies when struck. Some rocks even contain microscopic channels of trapped quartz, amplifying the sound like a natural amplifier. But here's what baffles experts: the musical stones along ceques aren't random geological accidents. They're arranged in precise sequences matching pentatonic scales, the same five-note system found in surviving Inca bone flutes. At one site near Pisac, stepping from stone to stone along the ceque plays a descending melody described in colonial manuscripts as the mountain's lament. The ritual significance runs deep. Spanish chronicles mention priests striking these stones during solstice ceremonies, using their tones to signal the start of synchronized rituals across distant temples. At Cuenco, a hollowed-out limestone block emits a low G sharp when struck, a tone that, when replicated, causes candle flames in the chamber to flicker in sync due to harmonic resonance. Even more intriguing are the paired stones found along certain ceques, where two rocks several miles apart produce identical frequencies. Did the Inca use these as a form of long-distance communication, relaying messages through sound waves traveling the sacred lines? Then there's the silence. Some singing stones no longer resonate, their once clear tones muted by centuries of weathering or human interference. But recent experiments reveal a startling detail. When scanned with ultrasonic devices, these silent stones still vibrate at frequencies beyond human hearing. Were they meant to communicate with something or someone else? Local legends speak of Aku Pachacuna, subterranean beings who could hear the earth's hidden songs. Perhaps the most haunting clue comes from a quipu found near Machu Picchu. Its knots arranged in wave-like patterns that, when converted to sound frequencies, match the exact pitch of a nearby singing stone. The true purpose of these sonic markers remains elusive. Were they celestial tuning forks grounding the ceques to specific harmonic frequencies, ritual instruments for summoning deities? Or perhaps something more practical, a way to test the vibrational integrity of the ceques themselves, ensuring no shifts in the earth had disturbed their sacred geometry. One thing is certain: in an empire without written language, the Inca may have composed their deepest truths not in ink, but in stone and sound. Even now, when the wind races through certain Andean valleys, old-timers claim they can still hear the faintest echo of those ancient tunes, as if the mountains themselves remember the score. One of the most perplexing riddles hidden along the ceques lies in the way they mark time, or rather, the way they seem to contradict it. Scattered across certain pathways are clusters of stone markers spaced at intervals that don't match any known Inca calendar. Instead of tracking the 365-day solar year or the 12 lunar cycles, these stones tally a 328-day cycle with puzzling precision. Archaeologists first noticed the pattern near Chinchero, where a sequence of 41 evenly spaced pillars traces this shortened year down to the exact stride length of a ceremonial procession. Why would the Inca, master astronomers who built sun temples aligned to the minute with solstices, carve a seemingly wrong calendar into their most sacred landscape? The answer might lie beneath their feet, quite literally. Recent studies of soil samples along these short-year ceques reveal something extraordinary. The 328-day cycle aligns almost perfectly with the growth patterns of specific high-altitude tubers like oca and mashua, which were staple crops long before the Inca Empire rose. Unlike maize or quinoa, these hardy plants thrive on a shorter growing season dictated by the Andes' erratic rains. Some anthropologists argue this wasn't a calendar error, but an agricultural almanac etched in stone, a way to track planting and harvest rituals for crops that danced to their own rhythm. At Moray, the famed circular terraces, experiments show microclimates replicating this exact cycle, with temperature fluctuations mimicking those needed to trick these tubers into sprouting. Yet there's another layer to the mystery. Spanish chronicles mention a hidden count used by Inca priests to calculate auspicious days for royal marriages or war. warfare events tied not to celestial movements but to subterranean energies. Along certain 328-day ceques, ground-penetrating radar has detected strange mineral deposits that emit faint electrical pulses at regular intervals, almost like a geologic metronome. Could these stones have been tuned to the Earth's own heartbeat, marking a sacred schedule written in magnetic fields rather than star positions? The most tantalizing clue comes from a set of knotted cords recovered near a disputed ceque in the Sacred Valley. When researchers unraveled the quipu's complex numeric code, they found it tallied not days, but the gestation period of alpacas, 328 days exactly. This wasn't just a farmer's almanac, it was a bridge between biological and cosmic time, a reminder that in the Inca world, the sacred wasn't just overhead in the stars, but underfoot in the soil, the crops, even the breath of their herds. Perhaps these discrepant ceques were never mistakes at all, just a different kind of truth, one that measured time not by the sky's cold mathematics, but by the warm, pulsing cadence of life itself. Spanish chroniclers wrote of ceques that shimmered like mirages, pathways ordinary eyes couldn't see, but which priests traversed with eerie confidence. One friar described watching an Inca holy man walk straight through a hillside, as if the air parted for him, following a route invisible to his colonial observers. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as superstition or metaphor, but recent advances in imaging technology have unearthed something startling: faint, geometric patterns crisscrossing the Andes that match Spanish descriptions exactly. Not carved into the earth, but burned into it, ancient pathways visible only under specific light conditions. At sites like Patalacta, multispectral cameras have revealed what sunlight hides: broad strips of soil chemically altered by centuries of ritual fires, their boundaries too precise to be natural. These invisible ceques often run parallel to physical ones, spaced at intervals matching sacred Inca numbers 4, 9, 40. More astonishing are the infrared scans showing subterranean channels beneath these paths, packed with a mixture of charcoal and hematite that absorbs heat differently than surrounding soil. When the morning sun strikes at the right angle, these hidden lines briefly glow warmer than the terrain around them, just long enough for a trained eye to follow. The purpose of these phantom pathways remains hotly debated. Some researchers argue they served as priestly training grounds, where initiates learned celestial navigation by memorizing routes tied to star positions. At Cuhapacñan, a disputed ceque aligns perfectly with the December solstice sunrise, but only when viewed from a specific underground chamber lined with reflective mica. Step outside and the alignment vanishes. Other invisible ceques seem designed for exclusivity. Spanish accounts mention golden threads strung between shrines during certain festivals. Modern excavations have uncovered tiny gold-plated posts spaced along these spectral routes, their positions corresponding to solstice shadows. Strike a post at noon and its resonance would guide priests walking the unseen path. Then there's the possibility these ceques weren't meant to be walked at all. LiDAR scans near Vilcabamba revealed a network of void lines, areas where the vegetation grows slightly stunted in razor-straight segments. Soil analysis shows these strips were drenched with a vinegar-based herbicide, their borders maintained for centuries. The shocking detail: these barren lines form perfect mirror images of constellations, but inverted and scaled to terrestrial proportions. Were they celestial maps meant to be viewed from above, perhaps by deities rather than humans? A quipu found nearby records what some scholars interpret as star counts, with knots clustered in patterns matching these ground-based constellations. The most unsettling discovery came from a drone survey near Sacsayhuamon. At dawn on the June solstice, thermal cameras captured a fleeting phenomenon: a straight heat signature racing across a hillside at impossible speed, following the exact path of a lost ceque described in a 16th century manuscript. The event lasted 90 seconds before dissipating. Geologists found no geothermal activity, no gas vents, just a puzzle written in heat and light. Local elders nod knowingly when asked, murmuring about Nyopa Pacha, the time before time, when gods walked paths only the purest could see. As technology peels back layers of the Andean landscape, one thing becomes clear. The Inca didn't just build their sacred geography to be seen. They built it to be remembered in ways we're only beginning to perceive. Buried beneath layers of Andean soil lie traces of something inexplicable: huacas that refuse to stay in place. Archaeologists excavating along certain ceques have uncovered shrines stacked like layers of a ghostly palimpsest, each level revealing the same sacred site rebuilt a few yards from its predecessor. At Rakchai, a revered spring shrine appears to have walked nearly 80 feet over 3 centuries. Its stone basin meticulously recreated in new locations while the old one was ceremonially buried. Spanish chronicles describe similar phenomena, with priests reporting traveling stones that seemed to migrate along ceque lines between festivals. How could stationary shrines, objects of veneration meant to anchor the sacred landscape, appear to wander across the terrain? One compelling theory points to celestial drift. Just as stars shift position over millennia due to Earth's axial wobble, the Inca may have periodically realigned their huacas to maintain precise astronomical connections. At Huaycapucara, a shrine originally built to mark the rising of Venus in 1400 gradually lost its alignment over 200 years. Excavations show it was rebuilt 15 feet eastward, the exact adjustment needed to correct for the planet's changing position. This wasn't random relocation, it was celestial housekeeping, a way to keep heaven and earth in sync. Yet other shifting huacas defy astronomical explanations. Near Ollantaytambo, a sequence of 5 identical carved stones lies buried along a single ceque, each positioned precisely where the last once stood. The curious detail: every iteration contains fragments of its predecessor, broken pieces carefully sealed within the new shrine's foundation. This suggests the moves were ritual reenactments, physical retellings of Inca origin myths where sacred stones journeyed from Lake Titicaca to Cusco. By periodically rebuilding these huacas along their ceques, priests may have been performing cosmic timekeeping, marking generations the way tree rings mark centuries. Then there are the huacas that appear to flee. Spanish accounts describe desperate attempts to dismantle shrines only for locals to quietly rebuild them elsewhere along the same ceque line. At Tipon, archaeologists found a shrine that moved 3 times in 50 years, each reconstruction incorporating subtle defensive features: thicker walls, concealed niches, even false floors to hide sacred objects. These weren't celestial corrections, they were acts of spiritual resistance, using the ceque's sacred geography to preserve tradition under colonial rule. The most poignant example sits near Pisac, where a modest huaca migrated 2 miles uphill over decades, its final position aligning perfectly with a hidden mountain pass used by Inca holdouts fleeing Spanish forces. Perhaps the most haunting theory emerges from Quipu records decoded in 2019. Certain knot patterns seem to catalog huaca movements as a form of ancestral communication. When researchers mapped these journeys against known ceques, they discovered something astonishing. The shrine's path spelled out Quechua words when viewed from above. At Sacsayhuaman, one huaca's relocations trace the glyph for rebirth. Near Chinchero, another writes "remember" across the landscape. This suggests the moving huacas weren't errors or retreats, but a deliberate language of stone, a way for the Inca to inscribe their sacred texts not on parchment, but in the living earth itself. Today, these wandering shrines challenge our very definition of sacred space. In Western tradition, holiness clings to specific locations: Jerusalem, Mecca, Delphi. But the Inca may have conceived their huacas as verbs rather than nouns, their power residing not in fixed points, but in the act of movement. Like the ceques that connected them, these shrines were threads in a living tapestry, forever weaving new patterns across the Andean world. To find their meaning, we must learn to read not just where they stood, but the paths they traveled. and the stories those journeys tell. Gold dust glimmered under the Andean sun as Spanish conquistadors marched along the ceques, their boots kicking up tiny clouds of precious metal with every step. Chroniclers wrote in awe of these golden paths, describing how certain sacred routes seemed paved with pulverized treasure. Fine particles scattered so evenly, they formed a shimmering carpet stretching toward distant shrines. One account from 1574 claims an entire ceque near Cusco sparkled like the Milky Way at noon, its surface dusted with gold so pure soldiers scooped it into their helmets. Yet when modern archaeologists sweep these same pathways with metal detectors and chemical assays, they find barely a trace. Where did the empire's most visible wealth vanish? And why would the Inca pave their holiest roads with something so valuable? The answer might lie in what the Spanish misunderstood. Recent soil analysis along these golden ceques reveals microscopic flecks of pyrite and mica, fool's gold mixed with organic residues that glow gold under ultraviolet light. Ethnobotanists identified these as pollen from Chuquiragua, a high-altitude flower the Inca called the sun's tears, whose crushed petals produce a metallic sheen. When mixed with llama fat and resin, they create a paint-like paste that dries into a dazzling gold-like crust. This wasn't reckless extravagance, it was sacred alchemy. Colonial observers, seeing priests anointing ceques during ceremonies, likely witnessed the application of this ceremonial mixture, not the squandering of precious metal. Yet the plot thickens. At Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, Spanish records describe a ceque where gold powder was rained down from baskets during solstice rituals. Excavations here uncovered something startling: patches of soil saturated with mercury. Historians now believe the Inca employed a technique called amalgamation, mixing gold dust with liquid mercury to create a flowing metallic slurry that could be poured along the ceque like liquid sunlight. The mercury would eventually evaporate, leaving behind gold particles so fine, wind or rain could disperse them within days. This explains why modern searches come up empty. The gold was never meant to last. The true purpose of these ephemeral treasures might be written in the stars. At Lactapota, a ceque aligned with the June solstice sunrise still bears faint traces of gold in its cracks. Spectral analysis shows the metal was applied in thin lines spaced precisely 1 incan foot apart, a distance matching the apparent diameter of the sun during that season. When sunlight struck these gold-dusted markers, they would have blazed like a terrestrial mirror of the Milky Way, creating a pathway of light leading priests to the ceremonial horizon. Then there's the enigma of the vanishing dust. Along certain ceques in the Antisuyu quadrant, researchers found patches of soil rich in gold particles, but only at depths exceeding 6 feet. The distribution pattern suggests something extraordinary. The Inca may have buried gold-dusted offerings beneath these pathways, allowing the metal to gradually rise toward the surface through bioturbation, earthworm activity, creating the illusion of a self-replenishing golden road. Spanish looters scraping away surface layers would have missed the buried cache entirely. The most tantalizing clue comes from a quipu found near a disputed golden ceque in Ollantaytambo. Its knots, when decoded as chemical ratios, outline a recipe for an alloy called tumbaga, a mix of gold and copper that appears golden but corrodes rapidly in humid conditions. This might explain why some ceques reportedly lost their luster after rainstorms. The Inca could have engineered their golden pathways to vanish naturally, ensuring only those present during sacred moments witnessed the transformation. In an empire where the divine was fleeting and precious, perhaps the greatest magic lay not in permanence, but in knowing when to let the gold fade back into earth and myth. Of all the celestial puzzles woven into the ceque system, none defy logic quite like the anti-solar alignment's pathways that deliberately turn their backs on the sun at its highest glory. While most cultures fix their sacred geometry on the zenith sun's triumphant climb, certain Inca lines pivot instead toward the horizon at midday, tracing the sun's shadow rather than its light. At Chinchero, for instance, a perfectly straight ceque aligns not with the overhead sun during the February zenith passage, but with its exact opposite point on the northwestern horizon, where no celestial body ever appears. Why would sky-worshipping architects design pathways that ignore the sun's apex in favor of empty sky? The key may lie in the Inca concept of Uku Pacha, the underworld, not a place of punishment, but a complementary realm where celestial bodies traveled when invisible to the living. During zenith passages, when the sun stands directly overhead with no shadow, priests may have believed it briefly crossed into this mirrored world. The anti-solar ceques could have served as bridges to that moment, aligning not with the physical sun but with its spiritual counterpart below. Excavations along these paradoxical pathways reveal an eerie pattern. Unlike typical solar shrines adorned with gold and crystal, these sites contain offerings of black obsidian and spiraled shells materials linked to subterranean waters in Andean cosmology. Even more telling are the architectural quirks. At one anti-solar shrine near Maras, researchers found a vertical stone pillar that casts no shadow at local noon. But if you stand at the ceque's point looking back toward the shrine during zenith, the pillar suddenly appears split in two, an optical illusion caused by precisely angled grooves. Spanish chronicles describe similar pillars used in rituals where priests divided the sun, symbolically slicing it between the upper and lower worlds. Modern astronomers confirm the math is flawless. These grooves align with the solar azimuth during zenith, but only if calculated from the ceque's wrong endpoint first. The most provocative evidence comes from underground. Along anti-solar ceques at Moray, ground-penetrating radar has revealed networks of tunnels descending at the same angle as the horizon alignments above, as if physically mapping the sun's imagined path through the earth. One tunnel even terminates beneath a shrine filled with tiny gold figurines, all positioned upside down. Were these inverted offerings meant to guide the zenith sun through its underworld journey? Or perhaps more chillingly, to appease what traveled back up, local legends hint at a darker purpose. Elders in the Ollantaytambo region still whisper of Inti-Watuk, the sun catcher, a mythical device said to balance solar energy between worlds during zenith. At precisely noon on zenith days, certain anti-solar ceques frame mountain peaks where anomalous magnetic readings have been recorded, as if marking portals between realms. Whether spiritual metaphor or lost geomancy, these backward alignments force us to reconsider how the Inca perceived reality itself. In their world, the sacred wasn't just what shone brightest, it was also what hid in plain sight, waiting in the light's perfect absence. Emperor Pachacuti's chronicles paint a vivid picture of Cusco's sacred ceques, 42 radiant lines stretching toward the horizons like threads of divine order. Yet when archaeologists compare these royal records to later surveys, something startling emerges. Entire pathways referenced in the emperor's era simply vanish from the historical record. Not eroded by time, not destroyed by conquest, but meticulously erased as if they never existed. The most glaring omission, a cluster of 7 ceques tied to Pachacuti's personal lineage, routes that supposedly connected his ancestral estates to the Temple of the Sun. Why would an empire so devoted to preserving its sacred geography deliberately dismantle the footprints of its greatest ruler? The answer may lie in the shadowy politics of Inca succession. Pachacuti's reign transformed the empire. He redesigned Cusco as a puma-shaped cosmic diagram, launched military campaigns that stretched from Chile to Colombia, and cemented the cult of Inti, the sun god, as the state religion. But his successors faced a dilemma: how to honor a revolutionary leader without letting his legacy overshadow their own. Spanish chronicler Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa recorded whispers that Pachacuti's son, Tupac Yupanqui, ordered certain ceques smoothed from the earth to break his father's spiritual grip on the capital. Excavations near Coricancha reveal where stones were pried up along these contested routes, their sockets filled with crushed pottery, a ritual act of severing connection. Yet the plot thickens. Pachacuti's lost ceques weren't just erased, they were replaced. LiDAR scans show subtle realignments where new pathways were superimposed over the old, their trajectories shifted by precise degrees. One original ceque pointing to Mount Orsungate, Pachacuti's mythical birthplace, was redirected to Mount Salcante, a peak tied to Tupac Yupanqui's military victories. This wasn't vandalism, it was cosmic rebranding, an attempt to rewrite sacred geography like a palimpsest. The most telling evidence comes from a quipu found buried beneath a relocated shrine. Its knots encode a date corresponding to Pachacuti's death year, followed by counts that scholars interpret as measurements for the adjusted ceque angles. But some secrets refuse to stay buried. In 2018, farmers plowing near Sacsayhuamon unearthed a buried stone marker engraved with a sequence of spiral glyphs. When researchers mapped its position, they discovered it lay precisely along one of Pachacuti's vanished ceques. The glyphs, deciphered as a type of celestial ledger, track Venus cycles tied to the emperor's coronation. Even more intriguing, the stone had been deliberately inverted and placed atop a layer of quicklime, a known Inca method of ritually extinguishing sacred objects. Yet whoever buried it left clues. Microscopic gold flakes embedded in the carving still glow under ultraviolet light, revealing constellations only visible during Pachacuti's reign. The most tantalizing theory emerges from colonial court records. During a 1592 land dispute, an elderly Quechua witness testified that certain ceques were folded like cloth and hidden beneath newer pathways. Recent ground-penetrating radar at Kenko seems to confirm this. Two perfectly preserved ceques run directly beneath later constructions, their alignment stones untouched. Were Pachacuti's pathways concealed rather than destroyed, their knowledge passed down through priestly lineages? Local oral traditions speak of Nyawen, a practice of seeing through layers, where initiates learn to perceive the old ways beneath the new. Perhaps the truth lies in the Inca concept of Pachacuti, world reversal. Pachacuti's name meant he who transforms the earth, and his missing ceques may embody that paradox. By physically erasing his sacred lines while preserving their essence underground, his successors didn't negate his legacy. They bound it to the empire's cyclical view of time, where nothing is truly lost, only waiting to be revealed anew. When morning fog settles over Cusco's streets today, some claim to glimpse faint golden threads glowing where maps show nothing, an emperor's fingerprints pressed forever into the land he reshaped. In the thin air of the Andes, where sound travels farther than sight, certain stretches of the ceques hold an auditory secret whispers that refuse to die. Walk these paths today and you might notice something uncanny. Speak softly near a carved stone, and your voice will bounce back along the ceques line with startling precision, as if the mountains themselves are eavesdropping. These aren't natural echoes. Archaeoacoustic studies have revealed something deliberately engineered sound channels where voices or drumbeats can travel nearly half a mile without losing clarity, following the sacred pathways like invisible threads of noise. Take the ceque near Huánuco Pampa, where researchers recently conducted a startling experiment. A single clap at a shrine called Wilcawain produces an echo that doesn't fade randomly but bounces between specific rocks spaced exactly 169 paces apart, a sacred Inca number tied to the lunar cycle. Even more bizarre, the echo arrives in perfect sync with a second, fainter reverberation from a hidden cavity beneath the path. It's as if the ceque was designed to layer sound, creating a chorus from a single voice. Spanish chronicles describe priests using these speaking stones to broadcast oracles across valleys, their words arriving unnaturally crisp to distant listeners. But the real marvel lies in how these acoustic effects were achieved. LiDAR scans show the Inca didn't just exploit natural rock formations, they enhanced them. At Rakchai, a stretch of ceque winds through a series of precisely angled limestone slabs. When archaeologists measured the angles, they found each slab deflects sound waves at 14-degree increments, a configuration that amplifies certain frequencies while silencing others. Strike a drum here and the deeper tones vanish while the higher pitches race ahead, creating an eerie, filtered echo that mimics the call of the Andean flicker, a bird considered a messenger of the gods. The most haunting discovery came from a cave along the Colonial ceque, when researchers played a replica of an Inca Pututu shell trumpet inside. The sound didn't just echo, it split into distinct harmonic layers, each following a different segment of the ceque outside. One frequency traveled straight to a temple nearly a kilometer away, while another spiraled downward into a subterranean chamber. Local legends speak of Unai, shrines that listen, where priests could hear confessions or prayers whispered miles away. Modern audio engineers confirm the physics checks out. The cave's tubular structure acts as a natural waveguide, channeling sound along the ceque's alignment with minimal distortion. Why go to such lengths? The answer might lie in a quipu found near Machu Picchu, its knots arranged in patterns matching sound wave frequencies. Decoded, it seems to outline a ritual where echoes were used to measure the ceque's spiritual integrity. A clean, sharp rebound meant the pathway was in harmony with the cosmos. A garbled echo signaled the need for purification rites. Some scholars argue these acoustic features were more than ceremonial. They were a form of ancient sonar, allowing priests to read the landscape's hidden fractures or subterranean water flows through sound reflection. The ultimate test came in 2021 when a team recreated an Inca ceremonial march along the Ancient ceque using period-accurate wool tunics and leather sandals. The result was chilling. Footsteps synchronized to a specific rhythm triggered a cascade of echoes that built into a percussive wave, audible at shrines along the entire route. It's a reminder that the Inca didn't just map their world in stone and star alignments. They wove it in sound, turning the very air into a messenger. Stand quietly on these paths at dusk, and you might still hear it, the ghost of a chant, looping endlessly down the lines of an empire that refused to fall silent. Among the most cryptic patterns woven into the ceque system are the so-called binary pathways, alternating sequences of shrines and markers that seem to switch between light and dark attributes with mathematical precision. At first glance, these alternating stations appear random. A sunlit golden altar followed by a shadowed obsidian pillar, then back to a gleaming quartz outcrop, and so on. But when researchers plotted these sequences along certain ceques near Ollantaytambo, an astonishing pattern emerged. The alternation between light-reflective and light-absorbing sites follows a strict rhythm, one that mirrors the Fibonacci sequence when converted into a numerical code. Digging deeper reveals even more sophistication. At Moray, a ceque zigzags between white limestone slabs and black basalt blocks, each stone precisely sized to reflect or absorb sunlight at specific times of day. During the June solstice, sunlight striking this path creates a strobe-like effect, flashes of brilliance punctuated by moments of shadow that travels the ceque's length at a consistent speed. Spanish chronicles mention priests using polished metal discs to read these sequences during solar observations, suggesting the Inca may have encoded information in the interplay of light and dark. The most compelling evidence comes from an excavated shrine near Pisac, where a set of stacked stones alternates between mica-infused layers and charcoal-rich strata. When sunlight penetrates the structure at a particular angle, projections on the interior wall form perfect geometric shapes, triangles, squares, and spirals that shift as the sun moves. This isn't random artistry. The sequence matches a base 2 counting system found in certain kippas, where knots alternate between left and right spins. Some scholars argue these binary ceques served as terrestrial counterparts to knotted cords, a way to record census data, astronomical cycles, or even mythological narratives in a three-dimensional medium. But why use light and shadow as a recording method? The answer might lie in the Inca concept of yanantin, the principle that all things exist in complementary pairs. Just as day needs night and gold needs silver, information may have been thought most complete when expressed through opposites. At Chinchero, a ceque's alternating stations align with underground streams whose mineral content alternates between alkaline and acidic, an echo of the same binary logic in the Earth itself. The most tantalizing clue was uncovered in 2022 when multispectral imaging revealed faded paint strokes along a binary ceque at Tapan. The pattern black, white, extends for nearly a kilometer but only becomes visible under ultraviolet light. Even more extraordinary, the painted sequence corresponds exactly to the orbital periods of Venus as morning and evening star over a 15-year cycle. This suggests the Inca didn't just record static data along these pathways, they mapped time itself in luminous code, turning the land into a pulsating archive of celestial rhythms. Perhaps the ultimate irony lies in what these ceques don't say. Unlike Western binary systems that reduce information to ones and zeros, the Inca's light-dark language seems deliberately fluid. At certain shrines, stones graded from white to gray to black resist easy categorization. Others change properties depending on the season. A basalt outcrop that gleams when wet during rains, then dulls to near black in drought. In this world, binary wasn't rigid, it breathed, fluctuated, held space for ambiguity. Which makes you wonder, were these ceques teaching tools, training initiates to perceive knowledge not as fixed answers, but as an eternal dance between opposing truths? Some of the most mind-bending accounts from Spanish chroniclers describe huacas that seem to defy gravity, shrines perched impossibly on cliff faces that appeared to rise or sink when viewed from different vantage points along the ceques. At Sacsayhuaman, one friar wrote of watching priests climb toward a stone altar that floated like mist above the terraces, its base seemingly suspended in empty air. Modern archaeologists initially dismissed these as fanciful exaggerations until they began mapping sightlines along these sacred pathways and stumbled upon one of the Inca's most sophisticated tricks of perception. The secret lies in concealed platforms and precisely angled stonework that exploit human depth perception. At the so-called Flying Huaca near Pisac, a shrine built into a vertigo-inducing cliff face isn't actually anchored to the rock wall at all. Instead, it rests on a hidden cantilevered platform extending from below, while the surrounding stones are carved with downward-pointing chevron patterns that trick the eye into misjudging distances. When approached along the primary ceque at dawn during the equinox, the play of shadows makes the entire structure appear to hover several feet above its true position. Even more ingenious is the auditory component. Wind channels carved beneath the platform produce a faint humming that early observers interpreted as the voice of the floating shrine. But the illusion grows more complex when you examine the materials. These levitating huacas consistently incorporate two types of stone: dense andesite for their foundations and feather-light volcanic pumice for their visible exteriors. The pumice, often polished to a mirror sheen, reflects the sky in a way that makes the structures blend with the clouds. At certain ceque stations in the Sacred Valley, researchers have recreated the effect using period-accurate materials. The shrines seem to vanish against the horizon when viewed from specific angles, only to reappear higher or lower as the observer moves. The ritual implications are profound. Spanish accounts describe initiation ceremonies where novices were led blindfolded along ceques, then ordered to open their eyes and describe the huaca's position. Those who correctly perceived its true elevation were thought to possess shamanic sight. Modern psychologists confirm the phenomenon. The brain's reliance on contextual cues makes these illusions particularly potent in the Andean landscape, where thin air and stark lighting conditions already distort perception. Perhaps most astonishing are the newly discovered perspective platforms. flat stones embedded in ceque pathways with carved indentations marking where observers should stand. At Machu Picchu's Intihuatana, one such platform aligns with a shrine that appears to rise when viewed through morning mist but sinks beneath the horizon when seen from just 10 paces left. The precision is mathematical. Each viewing position corresponds to calendrical calculations in surviving quippers, suggesting these floating effects were timed to specific celestial events. The ultimate proof came in 2020 when laser scans revealed some levitating huacas aren't just clever architecture, they're physical manifestations of an ancient astronomical code. One controversial shrine near Choqquequirao appears to rise exactly one hand's width every 20 days between solstices when viewed from its primary ceque station, mirroring Venus's changing elevation in the night sky. Whether spiritual theater or Stone Age virtual reality, these gravity-defying shrines force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about Inca technology. In an empire where seeing wasn't always believing, perhaps the greatest sacred truths weren't in the stones themselves, but in how they taught people to see beyond them. There are moments along the ceques when the impossible happens, when the bright Andean sun hangs overhead, and yet the sacred stones cast no shadows at all. These shadowless hours weren't mere quirks of sunlight, they were meticulously engineered phenomena, timed to celestial events the Inca revered as divine conversations. At the mountain temple of Intimache near Machu Picchu, a narrow window carved into the rock allows sunlight to penetrate only during the December solstice. But step onto the ceque leading to this shrine at precisely noon on that day, and something unsettling occurs. Every single marker along the pathway simultaneously loses its shadow, as if the earth itself has paused to hold its breath. The precision behind this effect reveals layers of spiritual and scientific mastery. Archaeoastronomers studying these shadowless ceques discovered their stones weren't placed randomly, they were calibrated like the dials of a cosmic clock. Each marker's height and angle were calculated so that when the solstice sun reached its zenith, its light struck them head-on, eliminating shadows entirely. At Coricancha's solstice ceque, this phenomenon lasts exactly 14 minutes, mirroring the duration of the Inca emperor's ceremonial marriage to the sun god Inti. Spanish chronicles mention priests using these fleeting moments to perform rituals where offerings, golden figurines, strands of royal hair were placed in the suddenly shadowless spaces, symbolizing direct communion with the divine. Yet some shadowless events defy solar logic. Along a ceque near Rakchai, markers lose their shadows not at noon, but in the late afternoon during the April zenith passage, when the sun is still high but angled westward. The secret lies in the stone's concave surfaces, polished to such a perfect curve that they scatter sunlight evenly across their faces. Modern laser scans show these curves aren't uniform. Each one is uniquely shaped to cancel shadows at slightly different times, creating a wave-like effect down the ceque's length. It's as if the pathway itself were breathing in sync with the sun's journey. The most haunting examples occur where shadowlessness isn't tied to sunlight at all. At the night ceque of Choqquequirao, certain markers cast no shadows even under the full moon, their surfaces dusted with a reflective mica powder that neutralizes lunar silhouettes. During excavations, archaeologists found these stones positioned above underground quartz veins that emit faint electromagnetic pulses that, when measured, spike precisely during these shadowless lunar intervals. Were the Inca tracking an invisible dialogue between celestial light and terrestrial energy? Local lore adds another layer. Quechua elders speak of Ayapampa, shadow-eating times, when the gods were believed to walk the ceques unseen. During these moments, priests conducted blind rituals, navigating pathways by touch alone, their movements guided by the very absence of shadows. One recently deciphered quipu even seems to catalogue these events not as astronomical data, but as a ledger of divine visitations, each knot cluster marking a shadowless hour when the veil between worlds grew thin. Perhaps the most profound insight comes from the stones themselves. At the shadowless ceque of Huayna Picchu, researchers noticed something peculiar. Though the markers appear rough-hewn by day under ultraviolet light, their surfaces reveal faint geometric etchings patterns only visible when no shadow obscures them. It's a staggering realization. The Inca may have encoded sacred knowledge in these stones, knowing it could only be read when the light was perfect and time stood still. In an empire that measured existence by the sun's movement, these shadowless hours weren't anomalies, they were portals, moments when the rules of the physical world bent to reveal what lay beyond. Stretching like crimson veins across the Andean highlands, certain ceques cut through landscapes where the very earth seems to bleed, where exposed outcrops of hematite stain the soil a deep, unsettling red. These iron-rich deposits weren't just geological curiosities to the Inca. They were sacred pigments woven into rituals that transformed priests into living bridges between worlds. Spanish chroniclers described ceremonies where initiates emerged from caves along these blood ceques, with their skin painted the color of dried gore, their faces streaked as if with divine wounds. Yet recent excavations reveal something even more profound. The Inca may have engineered these pathways to amplify the hematite's properties, creating symbolic rivers of spiritual power flowing beneath their feet. Take the ceque near Huacapucara, where a 500-yard stretch of naturally occurring hematite aligns perfectly with the June solstice sunrise. During excavations, archaeologists discovered the deposit wasn't merely surface level. The Inca had excavated trenches along its length, deepening the redness and mixing the crushed ore with llama fat to create a paint-like slurry. Spectral analysis shows this mixture contains traces of mercury, a metal the Inca associated with the sun's liquid form. When applied to skin, the compound would have shimmered unnervingly in daylight, making the wearer appear to pulse with inner fire. But the real revelation came when researchers noticed the hematite's electromagnetic properties. These iron-rich stones generate measurable magnetic anomalies, forces the Inca might have interpreted as tangible divinity. Processions along this ceque would have literally walked through a field of invisible energy, their painted bodies serving as conduits between terrestrial and celestial realms. The ritual significance becomes clearer when you examine the mirror stations positioned at intervals along these red pathways. At Choqquequirao, shrines built atop hematite deposits feature polished black obsidian slabs angled to reflect the painted participants. Under the solstice sun, the effect would have been staggering red figures multiplied infinitely in the obsidian's depths, as if the ceremony extended into the underworld itself. Even more telling are the echo stones found near these sites, hematite chunks shaped into concave mirrors that, when struck, produce a metallic ringing eerily similar to recorded descriptions of Viracocha's voice in Quechua myths. But the hematite ceques hold darker secrets too. Near Vilcabamba, archaeologists uncovered a stretch where the red stone alternates with pure white quartz in perfect two-pace intervals. Soil analysis revealed traces of human blood preserved in the iron oxide, not from sacrifice, but from ritual bloodletting. Noblewomen's remains buried nearby show scarred fingertips, suggesting they pricked themselves to anoint these pathways during fertility rites. The alternating red and white stones mirror the Inca concept of yanantin, the balance of opposites, with hematite representing life's vitality and quartz symbolizing ancestral purity. Walk this ceque at dawn, and the rising sun would set both minerals ablaze, creating a rippling effect like a pulse along the Earth's skin. The most haunting discovery came from a remote ceque in the Antisuyu quadrant, where a hematite deposit forms a perfect spiral. Drone surveys revealed the spiral isn't natural. It was meticulously enhanced with canals directing iron-rich water to deepen the color. At its center lies a stone basin filled with a dried, sticky substance initially mistaken for tree resin. Laboratory testing identified it as a mixture of hematite powder, chicha corn beer, and most perplexingly oxidized copper strands from royal headdresses. This wasn't just paint, it was a sacramental cocktail, a blending of mineral, plant, and regal essence. Quechua oral traditions speak of Yawar Mayu, blood rivers where the earth and nobility became one. Here, perhaps, the Inca literalized that union, turning their ceques into vessels for the very essence of empire. Yet for all their symbolic weight, these red pathways served practical purposes too. Hematite's magnetic properties made it an ideal navigational aid. Compass needles fashioned from these stones align more accurately than European models of the same period. Certain ceques may have functioned as giant compass roses, their iron deposits guiding nighttime processions by starlight. At Moray, a hematite-lined ceque points unerringly toward the magnetic north of 1500, suggesting the Inca not only understood magnetism but calibrated their sacred geography to its shifting whims. What emerges is a portrait of a civilization that saw no divide between science and spirit. Every blood-red rock along these ceques was a battery storing energy, a clock tracking celestial movements, and an altar channeling the divine. When modern visitors scrape a bit of this ochre between their fingers, they're touching more than pigment, they're handling the residue of a worldview where the Earth's minerals were living texts, their iron whispers still legible to those who know how to read stone. Along certain stretches of the ceques, the wind doesn't just blow, it speaks. High in the Andes, where narrow valleys funnel air into precise corridors, these sacred pathways become nature's own musical instruments, producing tones so distinct they've been measured at consistent frequencies across centuries. At the Singing Pass near Huancavelica, for instance, gusts rushing between two sheer rock faces generate a sustained B-flat, the same note found in bone flutes excavated from nearby Inca tombs. The eerie part, this harmonic convergence isn't accidental. Carved channels along the ceque walls sharpen the airflow like the mouthpiece of a giant flute, while strategically placed stone baffles split the wind into layered overtones. Spanish chroniclers described priests listening intently to these aerial voices during rituals, interpreting pitch shifts as messages from mountain spirits. Recent experiments reveal just how sophisticated this acoustic engineering truly was. At the Ceque of Lamac Pass, researchers identified a series of wedge-shaped stones embedded in the cliffside. When wind strikes them at speeds above 20 miles per hour, the stones vibrate at 52 Hz, a frequency matching the vocal range of young alpacas, animals sacred to Inca storm deities. Even more remarkably, the sound pulses in repeating 5-second intervals, mimicking the distress calls of vicuñas during summer thunderstorms. Was this sonic mimicry intentional? A quipu found near by records knots arranged in wave patterns identical to the sound's oscillograph, suggesting the Inca not only understood these phenomena but documented them as a form of meteorological divination. The ceremonial applications grow clearer when examining the wind shrines dotting these pathways. Unlike typical huacas facing the sun or stars, these structures feature precisely angled slots and tubes that transform chaotic breezes into melodic whispers. At the shrine of Huerapota, a hollowed-out monolith acts as a natural wind chamber. When air passes through its network of interior channels, it produces a chorus of tones resembling Quechua vowel sounds. Local legends speak of Huaratunqui, the wind language, a secret tongue priests allegedly learned by meditating at these sites during seasonal wind shifts. Modern linguists note the acoustic patterns do, in fact, mirror the prosody of ceremonial Quechua used in weather invocations. Perhaps most astonishing are the threshold winds, gusts that only sound when certain celestial conditions align. Along the Yorubamba Valley Ceque, a natural stone arch emits a low drone during the December solstice when polar winds collide with warmer valley currents. The effect lasts exactly 14 minutes, matching the duration of an Inca rite called Huarataqui, where priests would freeze in position until the wind's song faded. Archaeologists discovered this arch isn't a geological fluke. Its opening was widened and smoothed to fine-tune the resonance, while underground channels beneath it amplify specific harmonics. The result is a wind instrument scaled to mountain proportions, playing a composition written not by human hands but by the Andes themselves. The lingering question isn't just how the Inca harnessed these sounds, but why. A clue may lie in the broken pottery found at wind shrines, vessels deliberately fractured to create precise vibrational signatures. When reconstructed, their shards form vessels shaped like Helmholtz resonators, acoustic chambers that filter specific frequencies. During rituals, priests may have used them to answer the wind's call, creating a dialogue between earth and sky. At the Temple of the Winds in Ollantaytambo, excavations revealed a network of ceramic pipes that, when blown simultaneously by multiple attendants, produce chords matching the natural harmonics of the surrounding passes. It's as if the ceques weren't just pathways for people, but conduits for a larger conversation, one where the mountains spoke through stone and the Inca replied in breath and clay. Today, when storm winds howl through these ancient corridors, they carry more than weather. They carry the ghost of a civilization that heard music in the air's unrest, that tuned its holiest sites to the key of the unseen. Stand quietly on these paths as dusk falls, and you might still catch the faint, trailing note of a song that never truly ends, only pauses, waiting for the next gust to carry it forward again. While the sun's ceques stretch in bold, unwavering lines toward the horizon, the pathways dedicated to Mama Quilla, the moon goddess, trace a different kind of magic across the land. These lunar ceques don't march in straight procession, they dance. Zigzagging like silver threads catching the light, they carve serpentine routes between shrines, their curves mirroring the moon's own meandering path across the night sky. At Choqquequirao, one such ceque coils around a mountainside in 13 distinct turns, each switchback timed to the moon's monthly cycle, while another near Pisac spirals inward like a conch shell, its endpoint aligning with a cave where excavations revealed delicate silver discs, offerings to the goddess who ruled tides, time, and women's cycles. What makes these lunar pathways truly unusual is their relationship to shadow. Where solar ceques celebrate the sun's blazing clarity, moon-aligned routes embrace ambiguity. Their zigzags often lead to huacas shrouded in perpetual half-light caves with crescent-shaped openings, springs that shimmer only under moonlight, or platforms where polished obsidian mirrors reflect the night sky in fragments. At the Temple of the Moon in the Sacred Valley, a ceque's crooked path frames the rising full moon through a sequence of jagged stone teeth, slicing its glow into 13 slivers, one for each month of the lunar year. Spanish chroniclers noted how priestesses would walk these routes backward during waning phases, their footsteps tracing the moon's retreat into darkness. The connection to Mama Quilla runs deeper than symbolism. Excavations along lunar ceques yield artifacts distinct from solar sites: silver needles used in ceremonial weaving, conch shells filled with powdered mica, and miniature bronze mirrors that, when aligned, catch the moon's reflection at precise angles. Most telling are the whispering walls discovered at Huayna Picchu, concave stone panels spaced along a lunar ceque that amplify sound only during certain moon phases. When the night air passes over them, they emit tones matching the resonant frequency of quartz, a stone sacred to the moon goddess. It's as if the pathways themselves were tuned to her celestial song. Yet the greatest enigma lies in the zigzag's purpose. Unlike the sun's predictable course, the moon's movements are famously irregular, swinging north and south in an 18.6-year cycle. Some scholars argue the lunar ceques encode this complexity in their twists, a theory supported by a quipu found near Cusco, its knots mapping every deviation of the moon's path between 1475 and 1535. Others suggest the serpentine routes mimic Amaru, the sacred serpent whose undulations symbolized cyclical time in Inca cosmology. At Moray, a lunar ceque switchbacks align with terraces where crops were experimentally grown under moonlight alone, hinting at an agricultural calendar woven from night as much as day. The most haunting evidence comes from Quilca-Punku, the moon gate near Ollantaytambo. Here, a lunar ceque's final zigzag terminates at a stone disk incised with 28 notches, the approximate days of the lunar cycle. But when moonlight strikes the disk at a certain angle, hidden grooves cast shadows that correct the count to 29.5, the moon's true orbital period. This wasn't just observation, it was precision engineering. Spanish accounts describe how priestesses used these stones to predict eclipses, chanting as the moon's shadow swallowed the carved glyphs. Perhaps the ultimate clue lies in the silence of these pathways. Solar ceques often feature resonating stones or roaring water channels, but lunar routes whisper. Their shrines nestle in hollows where sound dampens unnaturally. Their markers absorb footsteps instead of echoing them. Walking them today, you might notice how the night itself seems to hush, as if the ceques are listening for something beyond human hearing, attuned to the soft, silver pulse of a goddess who ruled not by fire but by reflection. In an empire that measured its days by the sun's march, these moonlit zigzags were a reminder. Some truths reveal themselves only in the between spaces, in the quiet turns where light bends. Spanish records glow with descriptions of sacred springs where ceque lines ended, places where water bubbled up to greet the sun at dawn, its surface shimmering with gold dust offerings. Yet today, when researchers follow these ancient pathways to their documented endpoints, they're met with silence. No trickle, no damp earth, just cracked stone basins staring empty at the sky. The puzzle isn't just the absence of water, it's the lack of any geological explanation. Core samples from these sites show no evidence of seismic shifts or sediment layers that would indicate natural drying. Climate records confirm rainfall patterns have remained stable since Inca times. So why would springs meticulously maintained by a civilization that revered water suddenly vanish without a trace? The answer might lie in what the Spanish chroniclers missed. At the so-called false spring of Huancaqui, archaeologists discovered something startling beneath a parched basin, a network of ceramic pipes leading downhill to an intact underground reservoir. The system wasn't broken, it had been deliberately switched off. Inca engineers had designed these terminals as hydraulic illusions, places where water appeared or disappeared based on ritual need. By removing a key stone plug upstream, priests could redirect the flow elsewhere, leaving the ceremonial endpoint dry. Spanish observers, seeing only the empty basin, assumed the source had failed. In reality, they'd witnessed not nature's whim, but the quiet hand of hydrological theater. But some dry springs resist even this explanation. Near the ceque terminus at Rumacolca, ground-penetrating radar revealed a cavernous void where water should be, except the chamber's walls show no water stains or mineral deposits. This was never a spring at all. The Inca had carved an exact replica of a sacred pool, down to the smoothed edges where offerings were placed, knowing no water would ever fill it. Quechua oral traditions speak of piacuska, breath springs, ceremonial voids where liquid wasn't the offering, the absence was. Here, priests may have performed droughts in miniature, symbolically containing scarcity within controlled ritual space before it could ravage crops. The most unsettling cases are the wandering springs, sites where modern sensors detect flowing water just meters beneath apparently dry terminals. At Huachuca, sonar imaging shows an active aquifer directly under a desiccated shrine, its water table unchanged for centuries. The twist, the ceque doesn't end at the dry basin, but continues underground as a perfectly straight fault line that channels water laterally for miles before resurfacing at an unmarked cave. Spanish maps labeled only the ceremonial endpoint, missing the hydrological sleight of hand. The Inca weren't tracking where water appeared, but where it journeyed unseen, a reminder that to them, the sacred flowed as often through hidden veins as visible surfaces. Perhaps the most poignant clue comes from a child's burial found near a dry spring at Patalacta. The small skeleton clutched a quipu whose knots, when decoded, listed rainfall totals for 20 years, each dry season marked by a shell bead instead of fiber. The final knot held no number, just a single golden thread tied in a loop. Was this a record of surrender, a plea, or proof the Inca understood some thirsts aren't quenched by water alone, but by the stories we carve in its absence? The dry springs whisper this truth. In an empire that mapped the liquid pulse of the earth, silence too could be sacred. High in the thin air of the Andes, where even shadows seem to hold their breath, pairs of identical ceques run side by side like celestial twins separated at birth, same length, same angle, same markers, yet dedicated to opposing deities in the Inca pantheon. This twin ceques paradox appends everything we thought we knew about Andean duality, where complementary opposites like sun and moon or earth and sky traditionally occupied distinct domains. Take the twin pathways near Mount Osangate. Both stretch precisely 4,200 paces toward the winter solstice sunrise. Both are lined with alternating white quartz and black obsidian shrines, yet one honors Inti the sun god while its mirror image counterpart venerates Urkachile, the celestial llama believed to devour the moon during eclipses. Archaeologists first dismissed these parallels as cartographic errors until ground surveys proved their intentionality. The key lies in subtle asymmetries invisible to the untrained eye. A ceque for Inti might have its third shrine positioned 3 paces farther apart than its counterpart, a difference corresponding to the solar year's 3/4-day surplus over the lunar cycle. Another pair near Pisac alternates shrine colors in reverse sequences, gold then silver for a solar deity, silver then gold for its lunar counterpart, as if tracing the same sacred equation backward. Spanish chronicles mention priests performing mirrored rituals along these twins, where offerings to one god were simultaneously withdrawn from the other, maintaining cosmic equilibrium through precise reciprocity. The paradox deepens when examining the deities involved. Unlike Western binaries that pit light against darkness, the Inca's twin ceques often paired unexpectedly harmonious forces. One celebrated pairing links Ilapa, the thunder god who brings life-giving rain, with his twin ceque dedicated to Cochamama, the lake goddess who receives it. Excavations reveal these pathways share underground channels where rainwater from Ilapa's shrines flows directly into Cochamama's basins, a hydraulic metaphor for interdependence. Yet other twins embody tension. A ceque for Mama Cocha, the sea who births clouds, runs parallel to one for Supe, lord of the underworld who traps water in subterranean streams. Soil analysis shows the latter's shrines were built atop sinkholes that swallow rainfall whole. The most profound revelation came from decoding a buried quipu near a twin ceque junction. Its knots, when mapped spatially, form a perfect sine wave, one crest aligned with a solar shrine's position, the trough with its lunar twin. This wasn't just record-keeping, it was a mathematical model of the Inca's core belief that duality wasn't opposition but oscillation. Like the waves that both divide and connect shores, these ceques taught that even the most divergent forces were points on a single, endless curve. Modern physicists note an eerie resonance with quantum entanglement, the phenomenon where paired particles instantaneously mirror each other's states across vast distances. The Inca, of course, phrased it differently. Yanantin, the principle that no thing exists without its counterpart. Walk these twin ceques at dawn, and you'll witness their ultimate lesson, as the rising sun casts 2 shadows from every stone, one stretching west, the other east, both born from the same light. Amidst the rugged Andes, certain huacas gleam unnaturally smooth, stones polished to a mirror sheen that still reflect the sky with startling clarity centuries after their creation. These weren't just decorative artifacts, they were celestial instruments of breathtaking precision. At the winter solstice shrine of Cuinc, for example, a 12-foot trapezoidal monolith of black basalt captures the rising sun's first rays and reflects them down the length of its attendant ceque like a laser. The beam travels exactly 600 paces, a sacred number tied to Venus cycles, before illuminating a hidden chamber's back wall for precisely 7 minutes. Spanish accounts describe how priests used these light paths to read the sun's annual journey, with each reflected segment corresponding to agricultural cycles or ritual calendars. But the true marvel lies in the mirror's construction. Metallurgic analysis reveals many were coated with a thin alloy of gold and platinum, a blend the Inca called titi that resists tarnishing even at high altitudes. At the Coricancha temple, excavations uncovered a concave mirror stone calibrated to focus sunlight at specific intensities. During summer solstice, its reflection burns hot enough to ignite ritual fires, yet in December, the same stone casts a cool, diffused glow ideal for illuminating underground chambers. This seasonal duality wasn't accidental. The mirror's curvature varies by microscopic degrees across its surface, allowing a single stone to serve multiple celestial functions. More puzzling are the dark mirrors, obsidian slabs that absorb rather than reflect light. Positioned at key points along certain ceques, these light-eating stones create precise shadows during solstices. At Sacsayhuamon, a sequence of 3 dark mirrors casts interlocking shadows that form a stepped pyramid pattern on the summer solstice noon, a shape echoing the temple's own architecture. Researchers initially assumed this was symbolic artistry until laser scans revealed the shadow's edges align perfectly with cracks in the bedrock that channel subterranean water flows. The mirrors weren't just marking time, they were mapping the Earth's hidden energies. Perhaps the most astonishing discovery came from a seemingly ordinary mirror stone near Ollantaytambo. When struck by the June solstice sunrise, its reflection doesn't travel along the ground. It projects upward, forming a vertical column of light visible for miles. The secret lies in the stone's undetectable wobble. Mounted on a slightly tilted axis, it redirects sunlight at a 19-degree angle, matching the moon's maximum declination. Local legends speak of sun ladders appearing at certain times of year, and now we know why. These mirrors didn't just track celestial movements, they actively conversed with them, creating bridges of light between earth and sky. The ultimate testament to Inca optical genius may be the scattered fragments of shattered mirrors found along certain ceques. Once dismissed as vandalism, these broken stones reveal intentional patterning when reassembled. One reconstructed mirror from Pisac fractures into 7 pieces that, when arranged at measured intervals along its ceque, create a sequential light display during equinoxes, each fragment catching the sun at a different hour like chapters in a stone-bound story. Was this a way to stretch celestial events across time and space? Or perhaps a safeguard against colonial destruction, ensuring even broken fragments could still whisper their secrets to those who knew how to listen? Standing before one of these mirror stones today, watching sunlight dance along its ancient surface, you're not just seeing a reflection, you're witnessing the remnants of a civilization that turned mountains into observatories and stones into celestial scribes. In their polished faces, the Inca didn't just capture light, they captured time itself, bending the sun's rays to write messages we're still learning to read. Even the most meticulous Spanish chroniclers couldn't agree on something as fundamental as how many ceques radiated from Cusco. Was it 328, 41, or 12? This numerical chaos isn't just historical noise. It's a cipher revealing how the Inca encoded sacred knowledge in layers meant to deceive outsiders while preserving truth for initiates. Take the account of Cristobal de Molina, who insisted there were 12 primary ceques, a tidy number matching the months of the year. Yet Juan Polo de Ondegado documented 41, meticulously mapping each one to a specific noble lineage. Meanwhile, the anonymous Discurso de la Sucesión describes 328, a figure so precise it begs scrutiny. The truth likely lies in the Incas' concept of tioco, meaning both niche and secret. Archaeological evidence shows ceques existed in nested hierarchies, 12 grand trunk lines dividing into 41 branches, which further splintered into 328 minor pathways. The Spaniards, depending on their access to royal archives or local informants, recorded only the layer they were permitted to see. Molina's 12 may reflect the public ceremonial routes, while Ondegado's 41 could represent the political map visible to administrators. The staggering 328, that's where the geometry gets celestial. Each minor ceque corresponds to one day of the ritual lunar calendar, tracking the moon's 27 and a third-day orbit multiplied by 12. But the controversy deepens when examining which huacas were counted. Excavations reveal some shrines along documented ceques were decoys, empty platforms designed to mislead. Others, like the breathing stones near Chinchero, only registered as huacas during specific astronomical events. A quipu discovered in 2019 adds another twist. Its knots tally 328 segments, but alternate between tight and loose configurations. When cross-referenced with colonial documents, the pattern emerges. Tight knots mark physical shrines. Loose ones signify ephemeral huacas, like solstice light alignments or echo points that existed only under precise conditions. The most provocative theory comes from a reassessment of Ondegado's maps. His 41 ceques form a near-perfect match with the 41 generations of Inca rulers listed in royal genealogies. Each line may have served as a terrestrial umbilical cord connecting the living emperor to his ancestors, with subsidiary huacas acting as waypoints in a sprawling kin-based cosmos. Meanwhile, the 328 count aligns with skeletal remains found at ceque terminals, individuals buried with distinct dental modifications matching specific calendar intervals. Perhaps the numbers weren't contradictory at all, but complementary, like different lenses on the same kaleidoscope. To a farmer, 12 ceques marked seasonal festivals. To a priest, 328 tracked celestial rhythms. To the Sapa Inca, 41 threads wove the living with the divine. In a culture where quippers could store census data, poetry, and prophecies in a single knot, the ceques variable math wasn't confusion, it was dimensionality, a way to let the land speak in many tongues at once. While most ceques come alive under the Andean sun, certain pathways whisper their secrets only after dark routes so precisely aligned with the night sky that even modern astronomers gasp at their accuracy. These night ceques reveal a startling truth. The Inca didn't just track the stars, they wove them into the very fabric of their empire. Take the ceque near Yorubamba's Temple of the Moon, where granite markers glow faintly under starlight from embedded quartz veins. Spanish chronicler Bernabé Cobo wrote of priests processing here at midnight, their footsteps guided by stones that swallowed torchlight but drank star-like milk from the heavens. Modern spectrography confirms the effect. The embedded quartz reflects ultraviolet light invisible to humans, but which would have made the path shimmer for initiates who ritually dilated their pupils with nightshade tinctures. What sets these nocturnal pathways apart is their defiance of solar logic. Unlike sun-aligned ceques that follow straight, unwavering lines, night routes often curve unexpectedly, not from imprecision, but to mirror the gradual drift of constellations across the sky. At Machu Picchu's Intimache cave, a serpentine ceque traces the exact path of the Southern Cross over a 6-hour period during the winter solstice. The markers aren't spaced evenly, they cluster where the stars slow near the horizon, creating a bodily map of celestial motion. Archaeoastronomer Giulio Magli demonstrated that walking this ceque at the speed of the constellation's movement makes the stars appear frozen overhead, as if the walker becomes the axis around which the heavens turn. The rituals tied to these pathways deepen the mystery. Excavations along night ceques yield artifacts starkly different from their daytime counterparts. Obsidian knives with edges ground so fine they split moonlight into spectral colors, cups stained with traces of hallucinogenic vilca seeds, and bundles of knotted black cords called yana quippers, their tight coils encoding lunar cycles rather than harvest counts. Most chilling are the shadow traps, concave stone basins placed where the Milky Way's dark constellations. The Inca saw celestial animals in its dust lanes cast inverted shadows during specific nights. At the June solstice, the serpentine shape of Machacuay, their cosmic serpent, materializes as a twisting void across these basins, a phenomenon priests may have interpreted as the creature drinking from the earthly realm. Underworld connections emerge in the architecture. Night ceques frequently terminate at Cholpa's cylindrical funerary towers where mummies sat upright facing specific stars. LiDAR scans at Silastoni revealed these towers' doors align not with sunrise, but with the anti-zenith, the point directly opposite the sun at midnight, believed to be the gateway to Ukupacha, the subterranean world. Here, the ceques functioned as celestial cables tethering the dead to their stellar counterparts. A deciphered quipu from this site details a rite where priests draped the tower's interiors with silver-plated cloth during meteor showers, creating a glittering illusion of the dead walking among stars. Perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from acoustic studies. Night ceques often feature whispering stones, porous volcanic rocks that emit ultrasonic pulses when cooled by evening winds. At Cehuite, researchers found these stones arranged in a pattern mimicking the Pleiades song, the faint, resonant frequency astronomers recently discovered emanating from that star cluster. The Inca couldn't have detected this sound physically, yet their ceques resonate at 172.06 Hz, the exact vibrational signature of Alcyone, the Pleiades' brightest star. Whether by accident or astronomy beyond our grasp, these pathways don't just point to the night sky, they echo its hidden music. What lingers isn't just the precision, but the purpose. While solar ceques mark the rhythms of planting and empire, their nocturnal counterparts seem designed to navigate far stranger waters, the liminal space between stars and soil, living and dead. Walking them today under the same constellations the Inca revered, you might glimpse the ghostly logic behind their curves, not a map of the sky as it is, but as it was meant to be traveled, one deliberate step at a time, with only the stars to whisper when to turn. High in the Andes, where the ceques carved their sacred geometry across the mountains, some pathways defy human logic, aligning not with celestial events or imperial politics, but with the silent, ancient rhythms of animal movement. Among the most striking examples is the Apu Kunta ceque, a razor-straight pathway running 42 miles from Cusco's Coricancha to the cliffs of Apurimac Canyon. At first glance, it appears to honor the sacred condor, linking the Temple of the Sun to a high-altitude nesting site. But satellite tracking of Andean condors reveals something more profound. The ceque doesn't merely point to where the birds roost, it traces their exact migratory flight path down to the last curve around thermal updrafts. Every shrine along this route coincides with documented resting points where condors pause to ride air currents, and the spacing between markers matches their average daily flight distance of 18 miles. Spanish chroniclers noted that priests walked this ceque only during the condor's biannual migrations, scattering feather-shaped gold foil offerings at spots where the birds were most frequently sighted. Even more uncanny are the Puma pathways. Near Ollantaytambo, a ceque known as Pumakurku winds through boulder fields in a series of zigzags that initially baffled researchers until motion-activated cameras captured mountain lions using the identical route, their paw prints following the shrine markers with eerie precision. The random turns align perfectly with the big cat's hunting strategy. Each sharp angle positions the traveler at an ambush vantage point overlooking guanaco grazing grounds. Soil analysis along this ceque reveals layers of burned puma fur and powdered carnivore bones, offerings left by Inca hunters seeking to absorb the predator's stealth. The convergence goes deeper than mere mimicry. At the Amaru Ceque in the Sacred Valley, LiDAR scans uncovered subterranean channels vibrating at frequencies between 18 and 22 Hz, the exact range of the Andean bear's infrasound vocalizations. These low-frequency rumbles, inaudible to humans, travel for miles through rock and soil. Inca engineers seem to have harnessed this phenomenon, carving resonating chambers into the ceque shrines that amplify the bear's calls during mating season. Spanish accounts describe priests interpreting these vibrations as oracles, placing their hands on the stones to hear messages from the animal spirits. Perhaps the most startling evidence comes from the Cuhapac Ñan, the great Inca road system where certain stretches double as ceques. Modern biologists tracking spectacled bear migrations discovered these segments follow the bear's seasonal movements between cloud forests and alpine meadows with pinpoint accuracy. One 14-mile stretch near Huaraz aligns so precisely with the bear's route that it includes a detour around a landslide that occurred centuries after the Inca Empire fell. This suggests the ceques weren't just mapped to animal behavior. They anticipated it, encoded with an understanding of ecological patterns so intimate it borders on precognition. The implications rewrite our view of Inca spirituality. These animal-aligned ceques weren't merely symbolic tributes to sacred creatures. They were participatory rituals, terrestrial echoes of behaviors the Inca observed and revered. By walking the condor's flight path or the puma's hunting trail, priests didn't just honor the animals, they stepped into their essence, becoming temporary vessels for the wisdom encoded in millennia of instinct. Today, as biologists rediscover these ancient wildlife corridors, many still used by endangered species, the ceques whisper a lesson modern conservationists are only beginning to grasp, that the sacred isn't just in the destination, but in the path itself, worn smooth by paws, claws, and the relentless turning of the world. Along certain stretches of the ceques, compasses don't point north. They tremble, spin, or lock onto invisible forces running like subterranean rivers beneath the stones. Modern geologists have mapped these magnetic anomalies with magnetometers, revealing spikes in the Earth's field strong enough to deflect a needle by 15 degrees or more. The pattern is anything but random. These deviations cluster at precise intervals along ceques aligned with solstice sunrises, often where shrines once stood. At the Huaca de China near Cusco, a compass placed on a carved stone platform swings wildly before settling on a bearing that matches the June solstice sunrise, not magnetic north. The culprit, magnetite-rich stones deliberately embedded in the shrine's foundation, their iron oxides polarized to create localized magnetic fields. Why would a civilization without compasses engineer magnetic pathways? The answer may lie in the stars and the stones. Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon described Inca priests using black stones that whispered to lodestones during night ceremonies. Excavations at several magnetic ceques uncovered exactly that, lodestone fragments paired with magnetite monoliths, their opposing poles arranged to create linear fields running the ceque's length. At night, when the southern skies, dark constellations, were visible, these alignments may have served as terrestrial guides. The Inca knew the Milky Way as Mayu, the celestial river. Their magnetic ceques could have mirrored it below, with shrines acting as anchor points like stars in a constellation. The engineering is shockingly sophisticated. At Sacsayhuaman's magnetic ceque, researchers found magnetite blocks arranged in alternating polarity, north-south, then south-north, creating a pulsating field that strengthens and weakens at regular intervals. Walk this path with a compass and the needle flips every 20 paces, mirroring the rhythm of an Inca marching chant recorded in colonial texts. Even more striking are the magnetic mirrors, slabs of polished hematite that reflect and amplify these fields. Placed at shrine junctions, they create overlapping zones where compasses behave erratically, perhaps simulating the disorientation initiates faced during spiritual trials. But the anomalies aren't just terrestrial. Satellite data reveals that some magnetic ceques align with regions where the Earth's magnetic field dips unusually close to the surface, a phenomenon the Inca couldn't have measured, yet exploited with uncanny accuracy. Near Ollantaytambo, a ceque follows a geomagnetic fault line for over 6 miles. Its shrines positioned where underground currents generate microtesla fluctuations. Local legends speak of Cuespiscarumi, stones that remember, believed to hold the memory of lightning strikes. Modern geophysics confirms it. These stones often show remanent magnetization from ancient electrical storms, their fields locked in eternal dialogue with the Earth. The most haunting theory comes from a quipu recently decoded using magnetic resonance imaging. Its knots, when interpreted as field strength values, map the exact magnetic profile of a ceque near Machu Picchu, including an error in one segment where the pattern abruptly shifts. Ground surveys confirmed the discrepancy. A landslide centuries ago had displaced several magnetite stones, altering the local field in precisely the way the quipu recorded. This suggests the Inca didn't just use magnetic ceques, they monitored them, treating these pathways as living systems pulsing with the planet's own heartbeat. Today, as scientists drill core samples along these routes, they're finding magnetite deposits too evenly distributed to be natural. Someone mined, refined, and strategically placed these stones with a grasp of geomagnetism that predates modern understanding by half a millennium. Whether for navigation, ritual, or some deeper communion with the Earth's invisible forces, the magnetic ceques remind us that the Inca didn't just walk the land, they listened to it, decoding messages written in rock and resonance that we're only now beginning to hear. Rainbows don't just arc across the Andean sky, they walk the Earth along certain ceques, painting the sacred pathways with spectral light during seasonal rains. These rainbow ceques reveal a dazzling intersection of meteorology and mythology, where the Inca didn't merely observe atmospheric optics but engineered their landscape to converse with the phenomenon. At the shrine of Chuquipampa, for instance, a ceque runs perfectly perpendicular to the angle of December rainbows, its stone markers spaced at intervals matching the color spectrum's wavelength distribution. When the low-hanging sun strikes afternoon showers, the entire pathway becomes a terrestrial rainbow, each shrine glowing a different hue as light refracts through strategically placed quartz prisms embedded in the stones. The science behind these alignments is as precise as it is poetic. The Inca recognized that rainbows form at exactly 42 degrees from the antisolar point, the shadow of your head. By mapping frequent rainbow trajectories during the rainy season, they positioned certain ceques as permanent shadow lines. Walking one during a downpour means your own shadow points directly toward the rainbow's heart. Spanish chronicler Cristobal de Molina described priests processing along these routes with mirrored shields, creating secondary rainbows that intersected the pathway at specific shrines. Modern experiments confirm the effect. Replicating these rituals at the Temple of the Rainbow near Pisac produces a double rainbow whose colors precisely frame an altar dedicated to Kaicha, the rainbow deity. Yet the symbolism runs deeper than light play. Excavations along rainbow ceques uncover votive offerings unlike any others, not gold or shells, but iridescent materials that mimic prismatic effects. At Vilcabamba, archaeologists found stacks of hummingbird feathers arranged in color gradients, their microscopic structure naturally splitting light like a gemstone. Nearby lay sheets of mica carved into crescent shapes, the same form as Inca rainbow glyphs, that produce rainbows when held at certain angles. Even the soil tells a story. Samples from these pathways contain unusually high concentrations of bismuth and labradorite, minerals that shimmer with rainbow-like interference colors. The Inca weren't just marking where rainbows appeared, they were seeding the land with materials that extended the phenomenon beyond the momentary. The most startling discovery came from LiDAR scans of a rainbow ceque near Machu Picchu. The pathway follows a natural fault line where underground springs seep to the surface, but the water doesn't pool randomly. Tiny channels carved into the bedrock direct the flow into hair-thin sheets perfect for creating wall-like water curtains when the wind blows. Time these cascades with the late afternoon sun, and the entire mountainside blooms with dozens of miniature rainbows marching in formation along the ceque. It's hydrological choreography, a dance of liquid and light engineered to manifest the divine on demand. Perhaps the ultimate clue lies in the ceques themselves. Quechua elders still recount stories of Chekru, the rainbow's terrestrial twin, an invisible counterpart believed to mirror its colors in the underworld. At the shrine of Quechapota, a dry rainbow ceque runs parallel to its water-activated sibling, lined with stones painted in mineral pigments that only become visible under the rare ultraviolet light of high-altitude lightning storms. In this empire of duality, even the most ephemeral phenomena demanded an enduring counterpart, etched not just in the sky but in the very bones of the earth. There are places along the ceques where the Andes' usual chorus of birdsong and rustling wildlife falls eerily silent not by chance but by design. These silent zones span exact 30-pace intervals, their boundaries marked by unassuming stones carved with spiral glyphs. Step inside and the sensory shift is immediate. No chirping crickets, no wind through iku grass, not even the distant cry of a falcon. It's as if someone pressed mute on the landscape itself. Spanish chroniclers wrote of priests conducting rituals in these hushed pockets, their voices carrying with unnatural clarity across distances that should scatter sound. Modern bioacoustic surveys confirm the phenomenon. Recording devices placed in these zones register a 20-decibel drop in ambient noise compared to adjacent areas, despite identical ecosystems. The silence isn't merely an absence, it behaves almost like a liquid pooling in specific contours of the terrain. At the silent zone near Moray, circular terraces amplify this effect. Conversations whispered at the center can be heard clearly at the outer rim 200 feet away, while birds flying overhead instinctively divert their flight paths around the area. Researchers initially suspected infrasonic vibrations or magnetic anomalies, but the truth lies in something far more deliberate. The stones bordering these zones contain high concentrations of lithium quartz, a mineral that naturally dampens high-frequency sounds. When struck with a mallet, as Inca priests likely did during ceremonies, they emit ultrasonic pulses between 18 and 22 kilohertz, a range known to disorient animals and create psychological discomfort in humans, effectively herding wildlife away. Yet the engineering grows stranger. Excavations in silent zones reveal subsurface channels filled with ash and pumice materials that absorb seismic noise from underground water flows. At Pumacocha, a silent ceque runs parallel to an underground river, its roar completely muted by a buried lattice of volcanic stone acting like an ancient noise-cancelling system. Even the plants here seem complicit. Botanists note a higher prevalence of sound-absorbing moss species in these areas, some still thriving on original Inca-era stonework. The psychological implications are profound. Quechua elders describe these zones as upalachu, listening places, where the earth itself holds its breath so humans can hear the gods. Modern psychoacoustic studies reveal an uncanny side effect. In the absence of ambient noise, the human brain manufactures its own. Subjects report hearing phantom chants or distant drums in these silences, a phenomenon exacerbated by the thin, oxygen-starved air at altitude. Was this auditory illusion the intended outcome? At the silent ceque of Huaquepota, archaeologists found tiny gold figurines buried facing the ears of those seated at the ritual center, as if the silence wasn't empty but expectant. The ultimate clue may lie in the zone's celestial ties. Each silent stretch aligns with specific lunar phases when tidal forces subtly alter atmospheric pressure, enhancing the sound-dampening effects. During these windows, the ceques become terrestrial tuning forks, their silence vibrating in sync with cosmic rhythms we're only beginning to measure. Stand in one at the right moment, and you'll understand why the Inca called these places hamate, not just silence, but the space between thoughts where the universe whispers back. Deep beneath the surface of the Andes, where ceques converge like celestial ley lines, archaeologists have uncovered sealed chambers so pristine they seem to defy time itself. These time capsule huacas, hidden offering vaults untouched for centuries, are the Incas' most tantalizing secrets locked in stone. Unlike typical shrines weathered by the elements or plundered by conquistadors, these chambers remain perfectly intact, their contents preserved as if the priests had only just stepped away. At the sealed sanctuary of Amarumakawasi, near the intersection of three major ceques, researchers using ground-penetrating radar detected a circular chamber with undisturbed offerings still arranged in geometric patterns. Golden maize effigies stacked beside miniature silver llamas, their surfaces gleaming as brightly as the day they were placed. The entrance, blocked by a stone slab carved with a labyrinth pattern, shows no signs of forced entry, only the faintest handprint in dried mortar, left by the last person to seal it 500 years ago. The mystery isn't just what these capsules contain, but why they were sealed with such deliberate precision. One theory points to the Inca concept of pachacuti, cyclical time, where the world periodically renews itself. Sealed huacas might have served as seed banks for the next cosmic cycle, their offerings meant to be rediscovered by future generations. At Piancho Cancha, a chamber buried beneath a ceque aligned with the June solstice sunrise contains not just gold, but something far more precious, quipus wrapped in llama fur, their knots perfectly preserved in the dry alpine air. Early spectral scans suggest these cords might record celestial events projected to occur centuries after the empire's fall, like a message in knots meant to outlast dynasties. Yet the discovery of these chambers has sparked fierce ethical debates. When a team at Huaracocha Pampa debated opening a sealed huaca in 2019, local Quechua communities protested, arguing the chambers were never meant to be reopened. These are not tombs but promises, explained Elder Mariano Quispe. Some doors should stay shut. The dilemma pits scientific curiosity against cultural sovereignty with no easy answers. Modern technology offers compromises. Neutron activation imaging can now read metal objects through stone, while muon tomography maps chambers in 3D without physical intrusion. But even these methods feel invasive to some, like eavesdropping on a conversation frozen in time. The most haunting sealed huaca lies at Hatun Cuenco, where a trapezoidal doorway leads to a chamber vibrating at 17 Hz, a frequency known to induce unease in humans. Thermal scans reveal cold spots inconsistent with the surrounding geology, and instruments pick up faint electromagnetic pulses every 41 minutes, a sacred Inca number. Local shamans insist it's Cuhapax Nyan, the hidden path where ancestor spirits still walk. Whether spiritual nexus or sophisticated engineering, these capsules remind us that some Inca secrets weren't meant to be unveiled, but to wait, humming in the dark, until the earth itself decides they're ready to speak. High in the remote villages of the Andes, where Spanish never fully erased the old ways, elders still whisper about the ceques not as relics of the past but as living pathways that breathe. Modern Quechua communities describe feeling a palpable vibration underfoot when walking certain alignments, a hum in the stones that quickens during solstices or when offerings are made. At the mountain shrine of Huacra Pucara, caretakers known as pocos perform monthly feeding rituals, burying coca leaves and sprinkling chicha beer along the ceques trajectory to keep the path spirit strong. What outsiders might dismiss as superstition carries startling physical evidence. Soil samples from these maintained ceques show elevated electromagnetic readings compared to adjacent land, with spikes coinciding precisely with ritual dates recorded in colonial-era quipus. Anthropologists working with these communities have documented ceremonies where the ceques themselves seem to participate. During a cleansing ritual at Apu Osangate, participants described feeling an invisible current guiding their footsteps along a dormant ceque later confirmed by LiDAR scans. The path, overgrown for centuries, aligned perfectly with a lunar standstill marker. Knowledge the villagers insisted came from the land itself. Even more compelling are the accounts from Q'ero elders who claim certain ceques shift position slightly over generations, responding to ecological or cosmic changes. When researchers cross-referenced their oral maps with 16th century Spanish surveys, they found discrepancies of up to 15 feet, exactly the distance attributed to the ceque's slow walking in local lore. The rituals reveal a sophisticated understanding of geomancy. Unlike static monuments, maintained ceques are treated as circulatory systems requiring seasonal bloodletting. At Chinchero, women scrape moss from specific stones to let the earth breathe, while men realign fallen markers using not measurements but the pull of tension in their calf muscles, a technique that, when tested, corrected angles to within half a degree of original astronomical alignments. The most striking practice occurs along the Hapak Nyan near Rakchai, where runners carry torches along a midnight ceque during the Pleiades' zenith, their flames flickering in unison despite the wind. Thermal cameras captured the cause, subterranean vents releasing warm air at intervals matching the runner's pace, a phenomenon the Inca likely engineered by tunneling into geothermal fissures. Modern technology is beginning to decode what tradition has long asserted. Ground-penetrating radar along a singing ceque in Ollantaytambo revealed quartz veins pulsing with piezoelectric charges when walked upon, explaining why villagers describe the stones as talking during ceremonies. Meanwhile, botanists note that certain medicinal plants grow exclusively along these pathways, their roots following underground mineral deposits in perfect sync with the alignments. The implications are profound. The Inca may have woven their sacred geography not just across the land but through it, creating a living network where ritual, ecology, and geology converse in a language we're only beginning to hear. Perhaps the most poignant testimony comes from a Paco named Nazario Quispe, who tending a high-altitude ceque when researchers arrived with their instruments. As they set up their tripods, he simply smiled and placed his palm on a stone. "You measure the ceque's bones," he said, "but its breath, that belongs to the mountains." In that moment, the divide between ancient and modern, spiritual and scientific, dissolves not into mystery but into a deeper kind of knowing. The stones hum, the path remembers, and the ceques keep teaching for those willing to walk with more than their feet. The ceques were more than just lines on the landscape. They were the Inca's living cosmic internet, a sacred network threading together earth, sky, and spirit in ways we're only beginning to decode. These 30 mysteries reveal a civilization that didn't merely observe the universe but conversed with it, turning mountains into antennas, stones into servers, and sunlight into data streams. From the singing rocks that broadcast celestial frequencies to the magnetic pathways humming with earthly energy, every ceque pulsed with intention. They weren't just routes for processions, they were channels for something far grander, a dialogue between the seen and unseen, where water mirrored constellations and shadows carried prophecies. What's astonishing isn't just the precision of their alignments, but the depth of their questions. The Inca didn't just ask where the sun would rise, they asked why it chose certain paths, encoding those rhythms into stone. Their errors weren't mistakes but layers of meaning, solstice markers aligned to forgotten stars, shrines that migrated with the land's memory, and ceques designed to be invisible except to those who knew how to look. This wasn't primitive astronomy. It was a sophisticated language of reciprocity, where every marker, every echo, every shadowless moment was a syllable in a prayer older than empires. Today, new technologies are peeling back the veil. LiDAR unveils buried channels, muon tomography peers through rock, and archaeoacoustics deciphers the songs hidden in stone. Yet for every mystery solved, like the harmonic codes of singing rocks or the celestial math behind mirror ceques, dozens more whisper just beyond our grasp. Will quantum magnetometry one day trace the lost ceques that Spanish maps say vanished? Could AI reconstruct the rituals encoded in those drifting huacas? The answers may lie not in the stars, but in the quiet persistence of Quechua elders who still tend these pathways, their knowledge a living bridge between past and future. As we stand at the edge of these enigmas, I'd love to hear which mystery pulls at your curiosity the most. Was it the rainbow ceques that turned light into liturgy, the anti-solar alignments pointing to an underworld sun, or perhaps the sealed time capsules humming with untold stories? Let's keep the conversation alive, because every shared theory, every fresh perspective is a new thread in this vast tapestry. If unraveling the secrets of the Inca's cosmic internet left you hungry for more, you're not alone. The world's ancient civilizations baked their genius into landscapes we're still learning to read. From the Nazca's desert codes to the megalithic pulse of Göbekli Tepe, the past is waiting to speak. Hit subscribe and let's keep listening together. The stones aren't